Hey, yo, if somebody sent you this video, it's probably because they thinking about you and they care about you. They care about you enough to let you know that you's a bitch-ass nigga and you gonna fuck around and get mollywopped in the streets with that fuck shit. The only reason you ain't got your ass whooped yet is because niggas love you.
Welcome to Silly Wales. It has been a while. It's been a while since I've said this is a mental health podcast, and we talk about things that are a little bit on the touchy side, and that's okay if you don't want to partake, you don't want to have a listen. That is good. We're not going to force you, okay? We want you to enjoy yourselves here or feel like you've connected with yourself or with us, or with the world. But if discussing things that are a little bit on the touchy side, things to do with suicide, things to do with assisted suicide, and more depressive topics, that's going to unnerve you, that's going to ruin your day, it's actually going to disrupt your flow, that is okay to watch something else. I want you to understand that. I want you to know that. There's no pressure here at all. Because this show is for everyone, but it might not be for you. It's been a while. It feels like it's been a month. Maybe it has been a month. Who knows? Hi, Joe.
Hello. It can't be exact. It can't be a month, really, but it feels like it. Well, actually, now that you said it, and I'm looking at the dates and stuff, I'm like, I mean, it's not far off. So,
It's been a while.
Luckily, you have been able to provide something for the in between of that, which was nice for me anyway to listen to.
Yeah. And so what we had in that little interim period was the Atlas Cupid show. And we'll touch on that more in the journal. But for a brief synopsis of it all, I slandered all of Midlands, banished Smethwick, whatever the fuck it's called, to the afterlife, and then sat down with Ryan and discussed his recovery. But we'll discuss it all later on.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, it's been a minute. We're not out of rhythm. We're not out of sync. So, is there anything I need to say, Joe, before I hit straight into mental health this week?
No, it's all on you, Mo.
Look at that. We never left.
It's been 2 days.
Yes, you heard me, hopefully. It is time for mental health this week. We discuss things to do with mental health in the news of this week. We have some interesting stories. I think we stuck with 2 in the end, but it actually reached a point where we were thinking we couldn't find anything to do with like news and mental health. And then we found the gold mine, and then we had to focus on 2, which was of importance to us on a level in which, one, we can draw back to because we discussed this topic before, and the other, well, we both lived and live in the vicinity of where these events are happening. So we went down the local route and also the callback route, because I love a good callback, you know. I think we're going to start off with the assisted dying update, which is what I've written on the show notes, which makes it sound like a patch for a game. But,
sorry, like Tearzu, like representation of reality, like of like different animals having like during the Cretaceous patch or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I'll provide another synopsis really of why we titled it the assisted dying update. We spoke about assisted dying in the bill that's coming into place within the government, and there's been an update to that bill and a recommendation of a change. Now I'm going to kick the ball to Joe.
Oh no! So we talked about this in episode 36, and we didn't necessarily know how close or anything like that we were to some of this becoming more general knowledge. And then I think within, I'm trying to think now how many weeks it would have been. I think probably about within a month of when we spoke about it, and then of course about a bit less than that from when it came out. I started seeing on the TV at work that there was some like committee discussions about the assisted dying bill happening. So we just like we happened to catch it just before it became like now something like a media talking piece, like that you would actually see on news stuff. Which was great. We sort of hit it at the right moment. And hopefully there are people who like saw it coming, who maybe saw it and were like, oh, I've heard about this, and like I can kind of approach this with like a more with some level of kind of knowledge prior. So obviously now that it's in the larger space, there are people making discussions about it. Kim Ledbetter, whatever, is a MP who is very much involved with the kind of direction of this bill, who we might reference here and there. But the larger discussion point, at least, that has come up in the Guardian, that we thought was an interesting area to kind of talk about with this, because it's especially when we're talking about, like, it is a very sensitive area, and we feel very like, as you know, if you listen to that episode, we had a very sort of like, yeah, this is a positive step that's being taken and all of that, but it's worth discussing issues or worries that people might have about these things, especially when we can see that yes, there are reasons for people to at least question or ask and put forward, like, yeah, this is maybe an issue or not. This is coming from the charity, the Center for Women's Justice, and Standing Together Against Domestic Abuse, which was about the sort of essentially the idea of coercion involved within people's decision making. Now, we didn't talk about it within people's decision making about wanting to have assisted death and so on. Now, this I think is technically, before we even get into this, we never spoke about it on the last episode, but this is always kind of a conversation that needs to come up around any situation in which, there's legal ability to say, oh, I want to have help to die and things like that, and why I think there are very reasonable questions like, should this be a thing? Because you can see how, like, if you had full ability to say, like, oh, I want this to happen, I want this horrible thing to happen to me, and we allowed that consent fully, and it was kind of legally recognized that way, that there is naturally, I think a lot of people would go, that seems like something that could be manipulated in some way, like, like it's not, the idea that like someone can be, that someone can die and essentially it has this air of like, oh, they just wanted to kill themselves and so on, when in fact it wasn't, for example. Very much like if we're thinking about it from a media representation, the kind of like, oh, he died, make it look like an accident or something like that, or like make it look like he did it himself, like he didn't, or whatever. Very like kind of mafia like representation there.
Yeah.
When we think about that stuff. Now, again, that's not what this bill is. This bill isn't like straight up like just the idea of assisted suicide in the larger, broader spectrum. But there is this very reasonable worry, and I really am not actually able to kind of speak on this with any level of like actual professionality, because I really don't know the statistics and everything that you would need to examine this properly. But the idea of like that people can be coercively controlled to be put under pressure to end their own lives. This is, I mean, as a general rule, we obviously know that that's not a good thing. And you can see how it would happen for people with terminal illness. I think this is the one bit where I felt like we almost got there, but maybe we didn't when we discussed it before, of the idea of not wanting to be burdensome on other people. And I think that can be like a purely organic, like self created thing. The idea of like, oh, I don't want to cause this issue or this issue, therefore, there are definitely, I think, people in old age who definitely feel like this. But the actual risk there is, what if you what if what if we normalize the idea that people can get assisted dying, and then when people know that, they go, hey, I'm going to manipulate this person to act a certain way or to do X, Y, Z. And so there's already been discussions about it. I'll just say quickly what it is that in this particular article that I'm looking at, what they've quoted as Kim Lebisa like mentioning about this, which is that the hope is with any bill like this that there would be, and which is also why this is not going to happen for a while. Like this bill is not going to come in like in the next year. Like it's going to be longer than
not
that.
at all.
Yeah, is there I've listened to experts and drawn from best practice to propose amendments which include an explicit role for social workers in the process and a requirement for assessing doctors to receive bespoke training in detecting coercion and pressure. I actually have no idea, because this really is outside of you might have a better sense of this than me, of how, like obviously that this would need to exist, but how good that can be, because I genuinely don't have like a good sense of like the ability to detect that sort of thing. And I'm not saying you do specifically, but I think you, with your work, with the work you've done in the past, I think you have more of an idea about, safe housing, or like, making sure that, young people aren't taken
general
advantage of and
safeguarding.
so on.
Well, like,
yeah, safeguarding, that's the word. Yeah.
Like it's also like, I've been a victim of someone stalking me with the goal to get me to kill myself. So it's like, it's a bit of to quote somebody, it's a sticky one still. Like it fathoms me. I'm perplexed by how this easily flew over my head anyway. I don't know about yours. And how like we didn't think of this when we were recording this episode to begin with. And we originally discussed this topic. And it's just like, to safeguard somebody from a coercive situation like this, it requires a lot of awareness and detective-esque skills. And the proposal of having a social worker be the person to sign off on this as well is interesting, because that means that we have to have a social worker assigned to you specifically, which means that someone has to look over who you are and judge that you are doing this from a good standing, I guess. So I find that quite perplexing and I would love to see how that plays out, because you have to then judge whether somebody's doing this of their own free will, or whether somebody's doing this because they're being coerced. And that requires so much. Like, because if you turn somebody down, but they are doing it of free will, you've effectively prolonged someone's, suffering. If you're right, and they are being coerced into it, the steps that need to be taken from there, it goes straight to criminal. Surely. If you're a social worker and you go, wait a second, this person's a victim of domestic abuse, it goes from this person's about to commit suicide to we're about to arrest the person who's causing this person to live their life to a point where they don't want to be alive anymore. It takes a massive leap in a different direction entirely. And
it's definitely a scary role, I think, to be in. Like, it would be a very pressured role, which social workers are in general, in that sort of role.
Exactly. But normally, because things like, as a social worker, depends on who you're dealing with, your clientele base as well. Like, you often signposting, but you're also offering support to someone who ideally wants to be helped and wants to get themselves to a certain point of safety. And then, but with this, you're saying that you have to make the judgment of that somebody is of sound mind to die. So it's a whole different pressure, because you want to help somebody by signing off on their death, effectively.
I will say, so an argument that's immediately appearing in my head, and again, this is my sort of reaction. This is my reaction to this point. I will quote Kim again, Kim Beber in a second as well. But don't we already essentially do this? Like, isn't there already attempts like this to recognize, for example, in the medical sphere, we consistently have discussions around like consent and for example, the nature of like at what point can a child make a decision that the parents are against, and and things like that. Like, for example, can a Jehovah's Witness prevent their child from having surgery and so on and things like that? Like these kind of areas are already being done. And there's definitely, I think, discussions when we even talking about like kind of criminal stuff where we make a distinction between the idea of someone being coerced into doing something versus someone wanting to do it on their own volition. So I think that, so to a certain extent, the only thing I'll say is or the one thing I'll say is that it seems to me like this is a discussion that is already kind of a recognized one within the kind of ethical legal system, because it has to be like when we're talking about like as being a social species and that we have this effect on each other, we do make these distinctions between like, is this person doing something on the basis of X or Y? I think if anything, what it says, that someone is making them do X or Y. I think that if anything, what it suggests is that any sort of push towards improving sort of like domestic abuse, like charities, like I shouldn't even say charities really, because that's not what I want. What I want is like actual, like I'm going to find this difficult to explain because I don't know this area very well, but stuff associated with domestic abuse and also just abuse in general, and these forms of like kind of social work or community work that attempt to try and break these things down prior, it just seems to indicate that is still like, it seems to heighten the fact that this is already important. And the fact that it's so important means that it will continue to be important even with this, and isn't necessarily this isn't necessarily the camel that's breaking the straw's back, if that makes sense. Like, really, it's just a lack of services or the way that people live in community that kind of can create like these situations in which you have these homes where this kind of thing can exist, and the messaging isn't necessarily right for everyone, and like, or the messaging isn't necessarily great for everyone. Again, it's a difficult concept because this is the kind of bleed between like social community and like personal and household, if you know what I mean. Like
it's also very hypothetical as well, because like
a
lot of this is there's something that I thought that this would be something that by the end of the year this will be like a done and dusted thing. But when examples like these here come up, because there's other examples now against assisted dying that are now becoming, well, they're being brought to the forefront. And it makes me think that this will take more than 1 year. We could be looking at that it takes 3 to 5 years. Or it's brought in a very restricted way, similar to how like medical marijuana is introduced in this country and it has been around in this country for a while. It's just very rarely prescribed by doctors. Mm-hmm. I feel like it will be like that. And I hope that whatever we do it right. But I'm interested to see where we take this and what we do as a country to mitigate these cases as well. Because it's a very awful, it's kind of, it's reality. These things happen. Like, I know it's mentioned in this article as well, but Women's Aid and other women's charities are pushing for people to be held accountable if, they commit suicide. If a woman commits suicide by way of general abuse, they want the abuser to be held accountable and charged. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that entirely.
Yeah.
It's wild to think that, I think it's very much a case of we're in a situation now where we have to really cover all bases and really safeguard the people who access these services as well. And yeah, that's it really.
Yeah, so this quote I will just say because I think that this kind of represents a lot of the idea I have on this. Under the status quo, terminally ill people, including women, are taking matters into their own hands, taking their own lives at home or traveling overseas. Right now, we cannot know whether these people have made an entirely voluntary decision, free from coercion, and in full knowledge of all options open to them. This, to me at least, that like quote is indicative, I think, of like a larger, I guess, like maybe philosophical, social idea, like thing that I have with like how legal systems should be, which is at the moment, like, because what is the alternative, right? Let's say there is someone who is going to take their life when they're terminally ill. That's already something that someone can do. I mean, people do that. And the idea is, well, okay, so if someone is going to do that, right now there is just no way in which that can be done in a way that's like safe and and so on, like in a way that's good for them, so to speak, and in a way that is like, okay, this is happening and there isn't, you don't need like a whole you don't need a whole like investigation done to check like why this person died and do all of this and that. So it's like a very kind of like a system by which someone can essentially express that, like, I'm terminally ill, this is suffering that I'm experiencing, and knowing that I am going to die, I've made peace with my with this, or as best as I can, but I don't want to keep suffering every day because this is just awful. So I want to be able to, make this a moment that occurs. I want to have time with my family or whoever is around me that I love, to have that, and then I can choose my death, right? And that makes a lot of sense. At the moment, that's not possible in the way that, because there is no kind of system for it, which again, that makes, that's essentially what this bill is about, is making a system available for that. So if coercion is something that someone will try to get someone to do to you, if you're pushing someone, like if you're coercing someone towards this kind of thing, is that going to change whether there's a system that's available for them to do it this way or not? Do you know what I mean? Like if someone feels like they want to die, is it if they're being coerced either way, does it necessarily, is it the fault of the system being put in place, or is it just the fault of the fact that someone is coercing them? And in at least in one of them, there is a system which can potentially, and should obviously, have a like safeguarding involved, and also can have like investigation made on behalf of the individual who is saying that they want assistance with their death, and have it essentially be noted and recorded, rather than a situation in which there is absolutely no paper trail. There's absolutely nothing involved. It's kind of like the thing with drugs, right? Where if, when drugs aren't something that you can get, people will end up getting them through other means, and that in itself is a problem because you have no idea what's happening then. You have no idea what's happening with those drugs. So when you look at it that way, is this I don't know if this is necessarily any different. All it says is that we need to make sure our systems have these in them, because in fact it would actually make it better than not having the system at all. At least that's my immediate feeling about this, and how I also feel about kind of like legal systems, like government systems and so on, that they need to, that they're kind of doing the thing that's already happening. I think you could even look at abortion in a very similar vein around this, where it's like, yeah, I mean, you can have all of this and that, but people still had abortions, even if it wasn't legal, right? And it's not, and does it make sense to criminalize it that way, essentially? So even though it wouldn't be criminalizing to kill yourself, I think that we recognize that we don't want it to be, we want people to be able to do it in the, I know it's weird to say safest way, but like you want people to be able to not suffer in their death just as much as you don't want them to suffer in their life. So we don't want either of those things. And we also want people who genuinely do feel this way and want to go through with this, not to end up essentially like having a horrible experience and then, failing in this endeavor and then being forced to continue to suffer with even more safeguards put on, like to prevent them from doing certain things, in the way that you would like a prisoner who tries to take their own life, for example. So yeah, it's just it is very messy, and I don't want to pretend it isn't. But that's my the reason why I think this makes sense to me is because I would rather it be something that has oversight than something that doesn't, and I'd rather have people being able to talk about it openly with the knowledge that there is kind of a normative recognition socially that yes, this is a thing that we recognize, and that we're not just going to we don't have a load of people thinking these things and not saying anything. So yeah, absolutely, you got to listen to all of these things, and I'm glad that any amendments coming out of this is, any amendments I think are good amendments on that basis. Obviously, unless they're terrible amendments, but I think that these worries are very reasonable, and if anything, these worries are just kind of improving the I don't know, the kind of filter and system by which we make a bill like this work. I also just want to point out, before we move on now, that in other countries there are versions of this, and in many cases versions that go further, and so we have a lot to work off of and learn from in this regard. This isn't just as much as I think this discussion makes a lot more sense when this is one of the only times it happens, and if this project was very new, I think that we can have a lot more. I think this conversation makes a lot more sense, and we can, I think, very realistically be a little bit more worried. But I do think that we have a lot to learn from other systems being used in other countries that already do something as significant, if not more significant, than this within their legal system. All the pitfalls, all of the kind of benefits, and the kind of things that need to happen in order for a system like this to work. I definitely know that my dad I've talked with my dad about this sort of thing, and I know that he definitely would want to have that control when he gets to a certain point for himself. So I know from personal experience and I fully back that he feels that way, and I can see why. So I know people who are thinking about this, who have thought about this, and want this to be a thing. So I can't really back down too significantly from my I agree with this thing existing. But I agree that it should have as much oversight as possible. Effectively, I'm happy with the biggest amount of oversight on something like this.
Yeah. I hate the fact that I'm making a football analogy right now, but in football, we've seen automatic offsides come into play across multiple leagues in Europe, and it works. It's very simple. There's cameras set up. If someone's offside, referee will be notified that's offside. Easy. In the UK, in the Premier League, we decided to do it using VAR, which means that people have to draw lines to check if something's offside. Now, the system was already made, and it's made to a high standard. All we need to do is take it and apply it to the Premier League. No, we have to try and do it our own way. We have to try and make it somehow better, but clearly worse. And overcomplicate something ridiculously simple. I am definitely afraid that we're going to do the exact same thing with assisted dying. That we're going to somehow make it incredibly inaccessible, or we're going to leave massive, massive flaws and gaps in the system that allow cases like coerced assisted suicide to happen. Now, I am not the most religious person in the world, but I pray that it is not the case, and I pray that we actually learn from our European, I would say comrades, but in a political sense, not quite, from our European counterparts, because we can't fuck this up. We just can't. But somehow I feel like this country will.
I don't remember what the actual date was, but I remember when the when it started coming on the news, that the idea of this being soon is not happening. Like, as we kind of discussed earlier, like this will occur years from now before we start seeing this even being possible. I think even as late as I'm fully pulling like dates out of nowhere, but like I remember thinking that it's like, oh yeah, like maybe 2 or 3 years from now is when we might start even seeing a version of this existing in a hospital somewhere. You know what I mean? Like this wouldn't even exist all over the country. The project will take time to like form, because it has to go through all of the political and legal process, and then it has to go through kind of putting the project in places where it makes the most sense, and then dispersing it beyond that a little bit further.
I know it's going to take time. That's not the thing. I am more along the lines of it will take time, of course, no shit, but the scope to fuck it up, it still exists. Like,
yeah, I actually think that the two sides you gave as well probably represents the two factions of people and how they feel about this. I think a lot of people who probably aren't so keen on this from the jump are probably the people who are going, think of all of the flaws that might exist within this. And then I think the opposite side of the people who are actually for it might have the cynicism of, let's not make this inaccessible. And I think those are actually the two sort of like discussion. Those are the two natural like talking points that are eventually going to force, hopefully, these are kind of like the evolutionary pressures, so to speak, of the bill and of this whole concept towards the kind of median in between that will be difficult at some level to just make happen, because it kind of should be difficult, you know, like it shouldn't be easy, but it shouldn't be to the point where no one can use it, because and I think naturally that is, I mean, even if it doesn't start out, it probably won't start out in like a perfect median, so it'll probably start one side or the other. But then I think even past that point, assuming that we still have it, let's say 10 years from now, I think that then that shifts will occur socially in the discussion of it, and that we will probably approach towards a better median over time. That's at least my reading of how these things work anyway, of like how society like functions when something new occurs in it and so on.
Yeah. Again, like it's one of those things I just look at and I go, someone's gonna fuck up somewhere, but you know, it is what it is, really. Again, like we know this is gonna take a while. I imagine that this will be a private thing first as well, so, and then it will be on the NHS. We still have that service, and we'll go from there most likely. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be too cynical about it, but yeah, I agree with you.
I am. Now, on to other news.
Please take it away.
Oh, Jesus Christ. So, back in the day, and by that I mean we're approaching 10 or so years ago, secondary schools, especially in London, had a lot of character to them, personally. There was different schools, and the behaviour was very much varied. So, the schools that I went to, where I met Joe, now became more of a academy style school in recent years. It's not quite an academy, but it's a very academy style school. But before, it was just a very hodgepodge of varying different behaviors. Had a really bad reputation, but it had character, you know?
Is it an academy now? Sorry, I just want to pause you on that.
Yeah, it's not an academy.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to check
to
that. In case there's something that I'm like missing on that, since I haven't been there in a bit.
Yeah. So academies have become prevalent in London, and they've taken over schools which are deemed as like failing or good, or just in good locations. And these academies are a law unto themselves. There's a thing called the Learning Trust, and the Learning Trust helps dictate pretty much how schools operate and how schools run. So if, for example, if we are at a school that's part of the Learning Trust, like a public funded school, if there's a complaint made and it goes high enough, the Learning Trust will get involved. Academies are independent, so they don't have those regulations at all. They don't have to worry about anything. They still get these Ofsted inspections, but they don't have to really action on certain aspects of how they do things. Now, Mossbourne is an academy that has been around for a number of years, and they've expanded. There used to be, I remember there just being one Mossbourne school in East London, in Hackney, and then it's now expanded to which there's 3 or 4 different schools, as well as primary schools, and now schools in Essex as well, under the name of Mossbourne, the Mossbourne Federation. And they are known for being extremely strict, military-esque in how they operate and attaining high grades, and students going on to get into major universities like, Russell Group universities and things like that. Now, this model of school has been hailed as being, the best. And we have this weird fetish of disciplinarianism, if that's even a word, and very militant-based authoritarianism as a way to educate young people. It does not and has never really been proven to consistently work, especially because of how varied young people's minds can be. We all learn in different ways. We all develop in different ways as well, which means that it's very, very difficult to have this one-size-fits-all approach to learning. Academies, in that regard, are very regressive. Now, I've done all the whole spiel. Mossbourne Academy has had multiple, we're talking tens to hundreds of complaints and safeguarding concerns about how teachers and members of staff treat children. Now, I, without doxing myself, live very close to one of the schools listed. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it. I've also had the sadness of working in that school as well. It is, as described in the article from The Guardian, it is diabolical. We have teachers on a power trip. So as per The Guardian, 130 parents of children at the school attended an emergency meeting to put their concerns to counsellors, including allegations that children were suffering anxiety due to tough discipline and shouting from teachers, and that a child was left all day in wet clothes after he was refused permission to go to the toilet. Now, they've also been noted as failing to make reasonable adjustments for children with special educational needs. This is literally everything that we claim to want to fight and go against. We want children to learn, we want children to develop, and here we are. We're still using outdated methods, and we now have teachers in the year 2025 being accused of emotional abuse towards young people. Now, it is very, very, very important that I stress this. A lot of parents view this method of teaching, the discipline-based approach, as being the best approach. It's not, and it really hasn't ever really been. The best approach is an approach that takes into account the feelings and the opinions of the young people within it. 300 separate accounts of alleged emotional harm at Mossbourne schools in Essex and in Hackney, and we have still done literally nothing. The article I posted is from the 2nd of March. We're recording this on the 2nd of March. There's articles that I'll also post from November of last year, and probably one from, I believe, the year before. Unchecked power tripping by failed BTEC military sergeants cosplaying as teachers is what will end up with things like the suicide rate in young people increasing, the need to turn to things like alcohol and drugs increasing, cases like bullying, because guess what? If you pee yourself and you're left in wet clothes, children can be cruel and they will take the piss. Ha! Did you see what I did there? It is still a fundamental issue that we have still managed to break a child's human right to be safe and a child's human right to have access to an education. Now, I've been going on for a while, but it is equally saddening to see that in some cases, teachers and members of SLT, which is senior leadership teams, have been aware that the child that they are yelling at is getting treatment at places like CAMS, which is for children and adolescents, especially dealing with mental health concerns and mental illnesses. And they've still continued to up the pressure and to treat them, well, like how they view them. Subhuman. That's me done.
I want to, by the way, stress something that you mentioned, which was about the bullying. I think it says a lot. Maybe I'm starting the sentence wrong. To me, there is something that, like, I don't know how much this really gets talked about, but I find it strange that the idea, by the way, disciplinarianism is a thing, is a word, that the way that teachers interact with students towards them is in some way not them effectively representing how they want them to engage with each other. So how do I put this? You imagine you have like an adult who is engaging with you. Now, I don't really, from young person to young person, in fact, from person to person even, how someone interacts with you and how you relate to like someone of authority and how that makes you think about how you should be isn't necessarily, depends a lot on the nature of that relationship. There are people at school, from my memory, who, when an adult engaged with them at school, ultimately they're not really listening to the adult, or they think like, oh, the adult is tripping, basically, is just like kind of talking nonsense. When they're interacting with them like overbearingly or like very strictly. But I think a lot of kids are genuinely made terrified by adults. And I think it's odd to think that somehow a teacher interacting with a student in a way that is bullying or incredibly negative or puts them down or even just tells them you are not allowed to go to the bathroom, to the toilet, right? The idea that, and put them, which by the way is a ridiculous thing. Like I just don't understand why that is so crazy. Don't get me wrong, I can see why. Like if the kids were taking the piss, I can see why you would go, okay, well, I'm gonna be very careful about how I do this, but I'm not gonna. But the idea of being like, no, you cannot go to the toilet just seems ridiculous to me. But that somehow like that children won't innately kind of add that into their worldview of how they should relate, not only to the specific people that a teacher acts towards, but also just that is how adults should be towards others. Because let me be clear, I don't think, and I think this is for a few reasons, I don't think that anyone really notices the way that an adult is, especially I think when you're an adult, the way an adult is with a child as really any different than the way an adult interacts with another adult. In the sense that when I think of like, okay, so me as an adult talking to a child, do I think that somehow as an adult I might have responsibilities to like say something that's necessary for the child, but I don't think to myself that I can somehow like talk down to the child. I don't think to myself, because to me that's like, it's ridiculous. Why would I think it would be okay to talk down to an adult? Why do I think it would be okay to talk down to a child as a result? And when we say child, we just mean like obviously someone younger than an adult, like, because obviously everyone's a child. What I mean is like, someone who is younger. Why that means I then get to talk down to them, just as much as I think it would be ridiculous for me to talk down to someone who's older than me, on the basis that like, oh, they're out of touch or anything like that. You don't know these people. And obviously, like, I have to respect the fact that, you're a thinking person with ideas and beliefs and so on. and we might disagree about something, but maybe we can come to a conclusion. I'm not going to be a shithead about it. I just think it's ridiculous, and you might think, okay, well, an adult should see a difference or whatever. Which, okay, I don't agree with you, but then I think to myself, okay, but how does a child interpret the way an adult interacts with a child? Does a child think that they should interact with? Do young people think that they should interact with young people differently than the way an adult does? And then when those young people become adults, how do the young people becoming adults suddenly think, oh, well, now I'm the adult, so I get to be shitty to younger people, but now I must be in fact very different and be a completely different kind of person when interacting with other adults of my age, which again is a ridiculous concept. But why is it that we think that that would occur? Generational like trauma is a real thing. It's been documented in lots of different ways, biological and social, like fit psychological, that kind of thing. But I find it odd to think that like the people that grew up in like the really strict Victorian schools, for example, back in the Victorian period, didn't end up being like interacting with people differently as a result of that being their education and their experience. Because I mean, you would expect that it would be. You expect that people's views are changed by like people in authority positions telling them how they need to be. And you're already going to a school for learning, so it seems it's deeply concerning to me that people might expect that there should be a very different relationship, or the idea that the relationship you have with like a teacher is something that is so different from like another adult in a position. I mean, again, we sort of talked about this. We talked about like the young black teacher assistant, and we talked about like the like coach, or maybe like football coach, or like just kind of like outside of school mentor position that adults will end up with children. And we don't expect them to necessarily, or I think we expect, generally speaking, a little bit more kind of familiarity, a bit more like case by case recognition of the individual and so on. And I think the reason is because that's largely because we don't have things like curriculums that need to be hit, and this pressure from above that is then put down on these schools. Just as much as you do need insight. Obviously, we've had examples of coaches being shit and other sorts of people, but I think that there's a kind of a recognition that like people not in these positions are able to recognize that no, it would be ridiculous for me to like not at least see the worth of this individual who I'm trying to discipline, right? To do something where you're putting the kid down is this completely like fucking moon talk that I don't understand, and that really like stirs me, and I guess is the bigger issue or is a big issue I find personally about this whole thing, before we even get into the fact that it's this Mosborn group and academies and everything like that. It's so ridiculous. It's so disrespectful. I don't know how to like go on to you. I don't know how much you want to speak on that point.
For me, it's more like we just using like the Victorian schools and all that stuff, right? I remember. I remember. It happens all the time. Like even like when you're coaching football, I'll hear coaches say things like, well, "When I was a coach, or when I was a player, my coach used to make us run laps, and that's why I'm like how I am today. I'm tougher and these kids are really weak nowadays, and kids are really soft." I'm like, given that you're remembering like really tough moments, and you're harking that as like a moment of you being tough while deriding kids for being soft. Your job as a coach is to make the kids tough, but you're not making them do laps though. Like there's a reason why they're not doing laps. Like if it made you tough and you're saying that this is a good thing for you, why are you not making them do laps? Oh, because the parents will complain. Really? Is that why didn't your parents complain? Like, oh, maybe because running laps isn't that good. Who would have thought? Like, like things like that. And of course, running laps is a very good thing for cardiovascular health. More running laps excessively is what I'm like pointing towards. And whenever I see things like this as well, like, oh, I used to get like the cane in school. I'm like, yeah, like, do you want to? Well, no, the kids are too soft nowadays. Well, so why did they get rid of it then? Like, that no, because the kids didn't get rid of it. The kids didn't decide to get rid of it. Like somebody else did. Oh, somebody your age did. Like you got whipped because it was okay at the time. But guess what? You're psychologically scarred from that, which is why you make it a good thing. This is not your like moment of look at how tough I am. This is your moment of trying to cope with the fact that you are severely hurt by this. Being whipped with a cane is a traumatic event. You know? Like it's
yeah, I was going to say also anecdotes are garbage for like determining whether whether a kind of whole system of like punishment and things like that are actually like reasonable in, you know, to have in schooling and things like that. Like we're not good at self-assessing how good like a particular system was for ourselves, because you wouldn't have even the knowledge at the time to be able to understand that, to kind of, for that to not, you know what I mean? Like you're looking at it from this perspective you have now of who you are. Whereas like, yeah, you're probably one of the many who are just kind of in, like, who are like that, and you don't know how it's affected you. Not really.
You're like that despite the fact that something pretty bad happened to you, you know? Like if you want to, also you're calling yourself a success story, but remember, your foundation is built upon the fact that somebody had to physically beat you into submission. That is bad. Sorry, like that's not a good thing. So in the same way that, you know, we read this article and we have like, because here's the thing, we actually went through this. Me and you went through this, a version of this. One of the things that that was described in this article by The Guardian is the teacher described attending threatening assemblies which students were told about the long list of rules and punishments. And they said some students have panic attacks. Now, I remember having a panic attack when I went through this assembly like 6 or 7 times in my school life, because I moved schools quite a lot as well. You know, and I remember getting one of these when I went to Pechi, and the long list of rules, and I was like, I can't keep up, because like we had to have our ties really high, and if they were too low, we were given a clip on. Then all of our buttons had to be done up to the very top. Okay, cool. But I'm really bad in the heat, and like I need to breathe. But okay, no, I have to be tough, so breathing's not an option. And then you had to always wear, like, you couldn't walk around in just like a vest, not vest, in just a shirt and tie. You have to either have a blazer on, you have to have a jumper on. Fuck, Jesus, okay. Heat. I don't like heat at all, you know? We better be tough then. And then, of course, shirt had to be tucked in. Come on, like, who the fuck you think you're talking to? Joe Bananas? No, you know, you have to look presentable. Okay? Oh, and by the way, school trousers. None of that, like, dark colored jeans. School trousers. And they have to be of appropriate length as well. Oh, and if you're a girl, make sure your skirt isn't too short. Because we're not creepy. You are. Like, it's this, and then you can't walk with more than 2 people in the hallway, and then you have to make sure that you're not covering up a whole stairwell, so you have to go in a single file. And that rule makes sense, right? Safety, don't fall into each other. But you'll be surprised when people walk at different speeds and how that works. And then you can't like walk over a certain speed. And then, when you're entering a classroom, you have to stand behind your desk until the teacher says sit down, which is a rule which I always found funny because every teacher would forget to tell us to sit down. Like, it's these are the things that like just make no sense. Because what would happen is, at Pechi, they'll say all these things, but the teachers themselves forget half of them. And then they'll reinforce them when they need to get a bit of like control back. And it's like, yeah, I get it. But still, I don't think I left secondary school with a sense of discipline. I think I left there with an overall hatred of the idea of what adult says must go. Because it's one of the things I hate the most. Respect your elders. No, Go get fucked. Like I'm not respecting you because you're older than me. You don't like. As I found out the easy way, just because you're older than me doesn't mean you know more than me. You might have seen. Heck, to be honest, you might have not even seen more of the world than me. You may have even never left like this country. So yeah, maybe you've had experiences of life. Maybe you've dealt with heartbreak. Maybe you've dealt with death. Maybe you've dealt with, I don't know, being incompetent for something. Maybe you have. But the idea that just because you say something, I have to do it because you are of a standing in a building. Nah, that's what I was taught. I was taught not to listen to anyone unless they can actually, have some sort of standing and respect for the space they're in and respect for the people in which they're trying to teach. And guess what? This happened to me. I became pretty good at working with younger people. Why? Because if I talk like a fucking dickhead, they might be quiet and listen. Cool. But they're going to leave thinking I'm a fucking dickhead. Which means nothing I say has an impact apart from the fact that they don't like me because I'm a fucking dickhead. If I then go instead and I have conversations with them and I actually build a understanding of, hey, like you guys are going to respect me, but guess what? I respect you too. They might dislike how I speak. They might dislike things about me. But at the end of the day, they'll go, yeah, he's not the worst. And also, he's not a dickhead. And I'm learning a decent amount of English now. Of Mice and Men, Jesus, can it be a boring book? If I hear a kid say that, I'm going to shoot him. But, if it might be a boring book, but it's palatable, I could deal with it. Because my teacher isn't a dickhead. Because that's what kills it. I hate Shakespeare. Why? I was taught it really badly by a teacher who's more focused on me catching up and me writing the right answers rather than me actually understanding the work of literature, the piece of literature that is in front of us. Midsummer's Night Dream, I hate it. Burn that shit. But of Mice and Men, I was taught that really well. Was made to go over like different scripts from the film. How is Curly, describe Curly's character. Okay, more. I remember the teacher saying, okay, more. And I'll say something else about Curly. Okay, more. Just what can you get out of me in a positive way? Of Mice and Men is one of my favorite pieces of work ever. Just like that. So yeah, saying that staff are humiliating students, it's a heartbreaking thing. And the poor year sevens,
I know.
they're 5'1", like everyone's massive, and they spend half their time walking into things and people, and their voices like this, and to be like bullied by adults and older children is just sad. So I truly hope that I come across a Mossborn teacher and I'm gonna talk to them as if I'm on their side. But yeah, these kids need discipline. And they'll be like, yeah, I made this kid wear his pants. And then I'm going to slap him across the face.
I mean, just to give a little bit of insight as well, like Mossborn was my top pick for a school when I was looking around at schools.
Yeah.
Like back in 2007, which is kind of crazy thinking about it like that. But, it's 2007, 2008. So, this at least to me is to us, it's like the fact because it's a local thing, like we just have like a kind of relationship to this. And I'm just reading some of these things, like its rules, including no special handshakes, no hugging, and no gathering in large groups. These are like such arcane like ruling and concepts. That disciplinarianism like really fits because it's just the idea of controlling everything. Actually,
it also just sounds sort of like,
I know.
I'm gonna say it what it is, and there'll be a guy being, "It make everything about race." Suck my dick. How about that? It just sounds really weird and racist. Like,
oh yeah, like the special handshakes thing is very much like
and
hugging actually.
Yeah, you can't fist bump then. Oh, you have to have a nice, firm, strong handshake. Guess what's gonna happen, right? Kids are gonna take that and they're gonna be like, "Ha, school's making me do this like proper firm handshake with everyone, and it's forced. And I know this because at my football club, they say you have to handshake all the coaches, and I make a point of shaking the hands of certain kids and fist bumping some of them. And like, no, you have to shake the hands of all of them. There's a reason why I don't want to shake all their hands. Why? Because they're really like anxious and just like it's really awkward when someone doesn't want to shake your hand, walks up to you and shakes your hand, because they're trying their best to not look in your eye while also looking in your eye. I don't want to look in their eye either, because I'm gonna like end up like just secondhand embarrassment. Like just fist bump me and walk away. Like, please.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way.
Anyway,
It's so archaic. It's so ridiculous. It's so overbearing. It's clearly there is this very much this like power like fantasy that's going through some of these people, and that seems to be the case from anonymous things said by former teachers.
yeah.
And so it's such a like, as a parent at the very least, I
I
want.
didn't they had kids.
No, sorry. I I parents, I would like to at least think of this not in the sense of like, obviously like they're gonna dislike this sort of thing, but I think what's interesting, like looking through this article as well, is how there really isn't anything that the parents have against the idea of there being a school which has like, that is very like, that has a kind of emphasis on like kind of discipline and so on. But there's this clear line and boundary being like pushed past for really no reason beyond essentially like trying to. I mean, it's just like incredibly over policing. It's like it's like we don't want even like a small distraction of something to occur, so we're gonna so like we it's almost like stamping out like creativity. You know what I mean? Or like the ability for them to feel. And at this point at the top, where the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told a conference of educational trust that the children feeling a sense of belonging at school was just as important as attaining good grades. Holy shit! I mean, just a sense of belonging seems to be like one of the most important things you need, because I think, probably like the absolute majority of reasons why kids don't do well at school is entirely because of that line. Like, I mean, if not all accounts almost are like, are something like that. I mean, for me, that was like, why I did struggle at school as well. Like the struggles I had were different, but and
Why I struggled.
and so on. Yeah, exactly. Like I can't think of like a more apt reality check of why, and I just can't see how some of these kind of like disciplinarian attitudes that are so so overburdening and so on, are just like are expected to be, like, oh, it's worth it. And it's like, no, I just can't. Like, it's so easy to just push someone into a position where they will hate learning and education for the rest of their lives as soon as they're allowed to leave it. I 100%. I mean, this is why so many people hate maths, because it's taught shit. And I say that as a person who loves maths. I know it's taught shit. Like when I was teaching kids maths in different contexts, I'm very, very particular about how I do it, and very particular about how I engage with the topic, because I used to teach like people in my class math stuff all the time. People used to ask me questions, I'd go over and help them. And it became so normalized that the teacher was just like, yeah, sure. Because I got good at it, right? And and I can see just how bad it is sometimes. And how when I wasn't allowed to do that, how significantly people just didn't understand what was going on and never got an explanation. Like never got an explanation that was like actually attempting to try and help them. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, clearly it doesn't. Clearly there's a breaking in not just in the way that some teachers are with kids, but also just in the way that like I think the system that necessarily like creates this checklist essentially, which is then used to determine whether a school is good or not, when in fact actually having a school where just the kids want to like feel safe and secure being there is probably the most important aspect of it. Like, fuck grades at a certain level, but like to a certain extent, but like you should want your kids to feel happy. Like when they're not with you, you should want them to be happy and safe. And I just don't understand how that could not be like your utmost, desire for your children.
They weren't happy at school. That's really it. Like, oh, I wasn't
Yeah.
happy at school. School wasn't supposed to be fun. It's where you got to learn. Well, that's why you're a miserable cunt.
Yeah, it's also why you think that work can be absolute shite and that's okay. And it's like, no, I don't think that's true at all. I think that's literally why people hate their lives so much, or why like, or why people have these like incredibly archaic interpretations about how people. I think a lot of toxic stuff comes from this perspective. Anyway, yeah, let's move on because
we're incredibly angry. We're very angry people. Anyway, yeah,
just repressed.
That's it. That's it. We've already gone like well over an hour, I think. Okay, and I think it's time we now move to old school City Wales. It is time for the journal. Yeah, it's time for the journal. We talk about our lives and stuff. I'm gonna start because, yeah. Things happened when Joe was on holiday. I was worried that it would be like no episode for a while, and there wouldn't have been. It would have been like a really long, prolonged period of no episodes, and I felt like, do you know what? I might as well do this. And I got back home from something, I can't remember where I was, and I thought, I just need to say something. And I did it, and that was the Alex Cupid show. I've planned this show for like 10 or so years with different guests and all that stuff. And I just kept on overthinking it, and I was like, oh, it's not going to work, it's not going to work. I said, you know what, just do it now. I did it. I, some reason, slandered the whole of the Midlands, and I'll do it all again, because who cares about Smethic, and raise it to the ground. Anyway, it was fun. I thank you for your support with the episode. It was really nice, and it was good to discuss things in a very punchy form. Because when you're by yourself, you don't really need to go into massive detail about things. You just kind of punch it through, you know? You just enjoy it. And then I had the episode of Ryan, which was one of the few things, one of the few like projects I've been a part of, I guess, where I've actually listened to it about a good halfway through. Like, even when I'm editing this show, I don't listen to all of it. Like, I hate my own voice. But I actually got halfway through this, and it was incredibly emotional. The feedback on it was really good, and like even Joe here, you mentioned that you enjoyed it a lot as well.
Yeah, I've listened to all of the Alex Cupid show. I love it.
Yeah, of course you fucking would. But yeah, like the solo one you'd have to listen to. But if you haven't listened to the Ryan episode with the Mosh Pit Danny, I really recommend you do. It is a thoroughly, for me anyway, it was thoroughly enjoyable making it. But the feedback I've gotten about the episode is that it's thoroughly enjoyable to listen to as well.
Just for the sake of for people listening to this episode, do you want to just very quickly say what the intent of it is, like compared to like what we're doing now?
Oh, or just like, I think every now and then, because there is no intent. I think whenever Joe goes away on holiday, this show would exist until further notice. The intent of it is there will be different guests from different parts of different walks of life, or just me being very Bill Burr-esque, doing what we do for City Wales, just in the scheme of an independent show. It's not gonna have its own feed unless it gets big enough that it has to have its own feed, and I do it alongside City Wales. But I don't see that happening for a while. I just want to enjoy. To be honest, City Wales is number one, so this is like a filler. It's like a spin-off show that exists in the universe.
But it could end up being a much bigger thing, as you said, because
Yeah.
you never know, like where you're going to go with it. Because I know, like from history, like us talking about the kind of ideas you had for it and like where it could go. And so, I mean, if even some of those things end up happening, that would be awesome.
It's in the whale verse.
Yeah, in the Whaleverse. Okay,
Oh God.
we have to come up with a better
Alongside
name than that. But let's yeah.
alongside that, the Happiness Project, which is my poetry album, I've started to do the Joyner Lucas approach to releasing an album. I've dropped 2 singles on Spotify. You can listen to them now. Again, appreciate the support on them already.
Oh, 2. I only saw the one. Damn.
Yeah, I forgot to send it to you. So I've done Love Is, which is like the first ever poem I've ever like recorded, and the version that you listen to on Spotify or all streaming platforms is actually the first time I've ever done like poetry properly like that in front of people, and well, first recording anyway. And yeah, I figured I'll put that version up as the album version, so that's a single, and then the other one is ADHD Writer's Block. Barely speak English today, and that's another poem which is like same day, same night. I just put it into 2 separate things, and they're both work that I'm happy with. I'd rather not have to perform or do ever again, because that is from 2022 and I've moved past it a lot. But this album has been delayed to fuck, and finally getting it out in some way, shape, or form is good. I've spoken a lot this episode, which is really weird. It's not really the other way around, but we're rolling with it.
No, you can't say that every episode.
I will now.
To get there.
But yeah, that's me.
What? By the way, was the recording of this? Was that from one that I was at, or was that from a different? Was that from one of the hidden literatures that I wasn't at? I'm just curious.
I don't remember. I want to say you weren't at that one.
I think I wasn't, just because I'm thinking about that night, and I think it was a different. I think I remember the set being different than the way it sounded when I was listening to the first one, to Love Is. Yeah, so you're passing over to me? Was that what was happening there?
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to talk about this, I think, because I mean, alongside the fact that I was on holiday, in reality, I've also felt incredibly bad. I've kind of talked about this now. I've talked about this with Kestis, and I've talked about this a little bit with Mum. I haven't like gone over in detail. It's absolutely the worst I've felt since I started working at this new job, and kind of a little bit worse than even like slightly before that, depending on how I kind of perceive these things. It was really bad. And it did affect my work, and it's made me now want to have a conversation with my work. I mean, I have to have a conversation with my work realistically, but I have to have a conversation now about all of it. Scheduling, like what days I'm kind of willing to work / how much I can work. I mean, that's kind of the bad part, is that I think it's more likely I'm just going to have to work less than I can change that much about certain days. Because unfortunately I work on weekends. I work on Fridays and weekends, so I mean, that doesn't really matter actually for the way my job works, because I work in the mornings, but I more importantly, I work on the weekends, right? And it's been, while I have really enjoyed the kind of waking up early, like that's not been a huge issue for me. It has been more recently difficult because I've struggled a little bit with sleeping, which I think is kind of a sad thing in part, which is why I think some of this, and why I've kind of noted it down as like sad, being the sort of the blame thing, even though again, I think while we talk about sad and we talk about it like being the reason, it's not quite, that's kind of a weird way of saying it, because it almost makes it seem like sad is like a person who's doing something, like I'm being targeted by sad, and it's like that's not really how that works. Sad is like a list of things that are associated with a time period of the year, and related to other sorts of symptoms in relationship to an underlying difficulty or issue or whatever, including the fact that I've bought some vitamin D tablets, and I'm having extra on top of the vitamins I was already having. just to make sure that that's not being a problem. I'm trying to make, even though today I am up later, it's because I'm not working tomorrow. And I do want to try and like be going to sleep earlier and eating a lot better. So I'm trying some stuff, but I also know that, you know, there was a lot of like kind of psychological, like once I went downhill, like once the hit me, the mind then kept going. You know what I mean? Like the mind really like kind of fucked things up for me and caused a lot of issues and made me very, very difficult to get a hold of, or and make me very unproductive, and made me just, you know, not someone that you can maybe not feel like me at all. You know, like I felt really much like a hollow husk. I haven't been even eating properly recently, so I genuinely feel I'm only now kind of physically getting back to a state of what feels like health. Like I feel like I ate, you know, a meal a day at most, kind of thing on some days. So that's good. It's actually also the reason why that I'm not going to do that I'm not going to be fasting, because it is currently that period of time, or it's about to be. Sorry, but I can't actually remember because I already made the decision I'm not going to do it, so I've not been paying
Ramadan's
attention.
already started.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It was either the 4th of March or it had already happened. I just couldn't remember which one. Because I was like, oh, it's like basically it's the month of March. It's like the 1st to the 30th, I think. So yeah, I'm not doing it this year, which is a shame because I did want to, but like with the way that I am, I'm just like I can't bring myself. Like I literally need to like eat and and probably gain a bit of lost weight. Which again, it's also sad because I was on holiday and had a really nice time, and I feel like would definitely actually helped me at the time, but also shows that this was definitely like something kind of burbling in the background, so to speak. Luckily, things are getting better. We kind of talked a little bit before we started about this, and maybe it's in fact like kind of as things get better is when you are able to be more self-destructive potentially, because you start gaining the energy, and so you come out of the shit times, but actually you're more capable of doing things that are generally self-destructive for yourself because you now have the energy to act. And you know, it's almost a kind of zen of depression, if you will, which is more of a joke, really, but kind of appeals to a concept which does exist, where you can feel like depressed, but at the same time, you almost feel like you're depressed in such a way where you're not going to where you can kind of just you can get on at a very in a very kind of like suffering way, as opposed to in a way that can be like largely self-destructive until you eventually suffer so much that you do things self-destructive. Yeah, I don't want to overbear on that point because I don't agree with half the things I'll say on it. But yeah, I kind of want to point this out mostly because I don't know how people perceive me and you when they listen to us. I was kind of thinking about this recently and why I want to talk about it. That maybe because we talk about this, and maybe because, especially for a while, we have sort of said that we're generally doing better. And it seems like, well, we're doing a podcast and stuff. Surely, I mean, one, I don't do basically anything really for the podcast. I don't do any like work outside of the recording. But like, you know, I think it's easy from like whether you think of it as parasocial or otherwise, that like, I think it's easy to just hear people kind of disembodied in this way that make you kind of look at, and because we're giving some sense of personality that we want to be heard or whatever, or we're trying to just be informative or whatever, that we can come across as being like in a better state than we are. Obviously we're human, and every like creator of anything would tell you this, but I want to be clear that I have had it really rough, and I have had issues with work and stuff like that, and it's been a big thing. It's been a big to do, and it's it's really and it's made me really worried somewhat about how much I can rely on myself to a certain extent to be independent. Like it's definitely kind of given me I think right now, because I'm in a better state. I shouldn't say slightly better. I am in a better state. I recognize like cognitively, like, yes, no, I am definitely able to do this thing, but you know, I can also see just how much worse it could have gone, and how, you know, what if I essentially destroyed my ability to go to work, and what if like I just never went to work and shit like that. I just gave up and then just didn't say anything, like with the avoidant behavior patterns I've had and so on, where I'm like, shit, okay, this could be like, and thinking to myself, like, okay, can I really, you know, am I, you know, the kind of statistics about people who have autism, especially around their ability to hold like a full-time work, is, you know, the statistics on it are really low. They're pretty abysmal. And, you know, and so that's a little bit worrying, I guess, is what I want to say. And so for me, it did kind of like shake me a little bit. I think more than anything, to be honest, it's made me just really want to not work at this place. Not just because, even though I think I'm coming back around to maybe being able to appreciate it in, you know, especially compared to my old job, but I also kind of want to stress that sort of part of the reason, you know, for that is things like, I don't want to work on the weekend anymore, and I don't want to, you know, I want to have the ability to have a life in you know, with, in a way where I can interact with others, you know, in a way. I want to be able to have a weekend day with my friend, which I know this is going to sound crazy, but me and Kessa, still having lived so near each other, have never actually really had the opportunity to just go out and do something for an entire day, because we have never been in the position where me and him like have both had like a day off, apart from like some random, apart from like his birthday, when I happen to have a day off, and other sorts of things like that. Like, something that you would expect to happen almost every week is something that I'm almost working every single day that he's available, and so on, and everyone else, right? Which has impacts in terms of what I can do feasibly every day. And even though, yes, I absolutely could do so many things, I just want to point out that I'm obviously not in the best position to be able to take advantage of that, because I'm just not good at organizing myself and looking after myself, and so on. And so I do need a bit of help to do that. So it would be nice if I could have a schedule and things like that allow me to do that as easily as possible. And I think even as simple as like a 9 to 5 would be significantly better, because at least I'm on the same schedule as everyone else. You know, at least I have the same kind of thing going on. So yeah, that's just been my kind of like recent thinking, that I really do want to get away. I also want to get away from a physical job. I want a job which is, even if it's shit, like I know a lot of people complain about like office jobs and stuff, but like I think I honestly, you know, I think there are lots of different organizations I'd be very happy working for. You know, I don't, there's lots of companies I think I would hate working for in a sort of admin role and so on. But I think there's also even some companies that I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'd work for them, and I would like to, and I think it would be good to, and so on. And it might not be the best thing, but I really would like to just be able to go to work and not have to push around a trolley like really like a lot, and feel, and really have to do it regardless of how I feel. Especially because I feel physically shit when I feel bad. Like, it's not just a mental thing. But if it's like, you know, but me feeling mentally bad, like that was just me going to school, you know, like that's like, I've had that experience. And to me, it's like, yeah, when I feel physically bad, I feel physically sick as well. You know, like it's a whole full body experience. And you know, that has been the worst recently. I still feel that hollowness inside me right now. And I'm trying to, you know, and again, it also, I fuck up eating, and all of these other things that make it really difficult to look after my body and so on. That makes a physical job like this like really difficult to maintain. You know, with that kind of sustainability and stability, I think that's the right word. I don't think I'm emotionally stable enough as it stands to be able to carry that out. So yeah, that's at least my general feeling, is that something has to change at work, and I'm going to chat to them about it, and I'm going to try to be as clear on this as possible. And I mean, we'll see what happens with that, to be honest. Like that could, lots of things could happen. I'll try and get back about it. And on top of that, my general feeling is that I really do want to. I want to just start looking again. So I am looking at jobs again, because I don't think I've just hit. I don't think it's not just that I've hit a wall, which I definitely was talking about and saying that I wanted to be prepared for. I think also that I really just want to get out of a job, which I think, largely speaking, is the hardest one for me to, a kind of job which is really hard for me to carry out when I'm feeling shit. Like, I think there's just a lot of jobs where I can do it even if I'm feeling shit, in a very different way to the very physical, the entirely physical job, largely speaking, that I'm doing now. And again, I am feeling a intellectual wall of, oh God, this is boring, this is shit. Yeah. So anyway, that's my whole thing, and I wanted to make that clear and known. And hey, if you're feeling like this, like, know that you're not alone, and we fuck up, and certainly I fuck up a lot. And I'm actually reaching a point of kind of self-love with that, and knowing that, yeah, that's fine. Let's just try and take that fuck upness and then like realize, like, well, you fucked up for this reason. But but the fact that you fucked up isn't like a denouncement of you. It's a recognition that what you're doing isn't right for you. And so you need to change, and something needs to change. And in this case, like, I am trying to change myself by trying to be better about sleep, food, etc. But I'm also recognizing that I can't just change myself, because that's not the only thing affecting me. There is an environment affecting me, and I want to change that environment. So try and do all of these things, balance all these things, and also, talk to people more. I mean, that's a larger project I'm trying to do, but yeah, anyway, sorry, went on a bit long with that, but I don't know why I wanted to give that kind of a sincerity that I was worried might not be there. In some, like, if some people heard it, they wouldn't necessarily realize how sincere I was trying to be about, like, yes, I've had it real shit, and it's affected me negatively, and I don't feel comfortable entirely talking about it until maybe later on, where I might go into it more, like, a year from now, or half a year from now, or whatever it might be, if it comes back to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like, because like we were both discussing that we've been feeling somewhat similar as well, and it's like there's I'm very much in a very bad, relatively low mood, I guess, and it's like, oh God, and it's, for me, it just feels like things don't go well, and to cut a long story short, we were discussing with both you and funny of Ryan about getting that win, about needing a win, and it's like every single setback feels more monumental than the last one.
Yeah.
Because I'm desperate for like that moment of like reprieve, I guess, and it's like I just want to be able to get that, and I can't. And it comes little things like, I don't know. I'm opening a bag of Skittles and they're all falling on the floor or some shit. I'm like, that's another L. And it's like, and it's just, it builds and it never really stops. And I can never seem to remember what breaks it. And I never know if it's a win that breaks it, or whether I just stop caring and then I pick up little victories here or there, and it just kind of equals itself out. I don't really know. I never really remember what breaks it.
For me, it's very gradual. Yeah, it's like very gradual, not to me, it's not ever an event. It's like, it's just something that occurs when when I guess my ability to sustain that feeling becomes impossible. Like, I just can't anymore because of the energy it requires. And then like things shift as a result of that. And yeah, sometimes I'm just an idiot, and it takes time for me to think out of my own irrationality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I've lost all sense of words here. Is it time to move on to recommendation station?
Yeah, I will say, actually, my when you were talking there, if you heard my ringtone gone off, which you might not have, that was actually my mum saying, "Be nice to talk. We'll be back home tomorrow mid-afternoon, so I'm going to chat with her tomorrow."
I didn't hear the ringtone at all. There you go.
Oh, okay. She's on holiday in Oh, I didn't say we went holiday, by the way. We went holiday to Haversidge, which is spelt like Hather and then Sage, Sage. All one word. Really nice place. I swear that I'm going to move up north. I think we all should move up north. It's fucking beautiful up there. And you can fucking buy a house or like get a mortgage for one, if you know what I mean. And, and you actually can get places that have connections to these, to cities and stuff. Some of these cities being really nice cities. Yeah, honestly, it was really beautiful and lovely. I highly recommend like the Peak District, which is where we were. It was brilliant.
Yeah, look at that. With that being said, choo choo! It's time for recommendation station. Which one of us should start? Me. Go on.
You should, yeah.
Because your one is more involved. Jesse
Nah,
Marsh, one of my heroes in the world of football. He recently gave an interview where it was part of like a panel on the state of football or soccer in Canada, and he was asked about the general rhetoric surrounding Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States, made by Donald Trump and the Trump administration of hatred and fascism and all that utter bollocks. And Jesse Marsh, like, is someone who I follow a lot, and from like what I know of him politically, he's, he said, I believe he said he's socially quite progressive when it comes to like the economy and things like that. He's fairly, central to, not, I wouldn't say Republican, but more along the lines of like leaning towards the right side. And I figured, okay, well, there's a man who's going to be like, Trump is my king. I wouldn't be surprised if it's him. But no, he actually went the complete opposite direction and went, I wouldn't say like, he's ultra woke or anything like that. That's not at all the rhetoric one I would use into how I would describe it. I think it's more common sense. And he explained very, very, I think dutifully, being the word, about why the rhetoric surrounding how we treat our allies, how we treat each other, is really important. And in a time where there's a lot of hatred, he really did stand up and go, hey, I'm the manager of the Canadian national team and I'm American. And I feel like this is disgusting, humiliating, and just downright sad. And it is one of the messages that we definitely need to hear. And you guys might think, especially if you're from the UK, you guys might not think it's important, but I think it's really important that we hear messages from people who, especially who don't maybe fit the bill of what we view as a progressive or what we view as a progressive action. But it takes a lot to be someone of a certain standing as well in what is a very tumultuous sport, a sport where people can love you one minute and hate you the next. So to ride that out and go, hey, I'm going to go against my own country here, I think is really important. So you can give that a listen. It's 2 minutes long. Me talking about it is longer than the actual video itself. But yeah, that's it.
As always, we got to do that. My recommendation is I think I struggle to talk as long as one of the things associated with this. So the Within Reason podcast I've described before, I recommended it. I can't remember how long ago, but I did recommend it. And I was listening to one of the episodes and thought, you know what? This person's come on this podcast twice and I've really enjoyed both of these episodes. And I thought, I want to recommend this guy because he has a whole fucking YouTube channel and he's a professor, a doctor, I should say. I don't know if he's a professor. And so I thought I would recommend this. And also I've looked at the YouTube channel and there's so much content. Like, so Esoterica is the person that I'm shouting out. On Within Reason, they were in 2 episodes. They were on episode 65, which was about the history of Yahweh, which if you know what Yahweh is, it's the sort of Hebrew Bible's sort of, and I shouldn't say just the Hebrew Bible, but prior to the Hebrew Bible was obviously the sort of name for a god that kind of essentially became the Abrahamic god that we think of now, sort of the history leading to it. And there is episode 83, which is about the demiurge, the history of the demiurge, which is a concept that I think starts from what I was hearing. I think it starts within sort of Plato's ideas about like a creator, essentially, that then gained a lot of following in like Alexandria in Greece and in Egypt, sorry, which is when the Greek and Romans colonized Egypt, they set up all of these places and blah blah blah. Lots of ancient history stuff. Like if you're interested in ancient history at all, and to be honest, I think it's just interesting to listen to because it's fundamentally fascinating to understand these like completely different societies in many ways to what we have now. I also think it's actually a nice bit of escapism that doesn't feel unproductive, because I think it does give you, I think it's escaping from the reality we're in by talking about it almost feels like you're talking about an Earth, like a parallel Earth that doesn't exist. Like, because it doesn't currently exist, but it's like kind of nice. It's almost like there's a little bit of element of like almost world law you're establishing if you're like kind of a fantasy guy like me. If you like it and all that stuff, and kind of like being interested in like how all this used to be and so on, but also having it in the back of your mind that like, oh no, this is our history. Like this is like the history that predates me, but not just me, also my parents, but not just my parents, also like their lineage, not just before their lineage, but actually the culture predates the culture, predates the civilization, predates, and you suddenly realize you're talking about, 1000 BC, and you're like, shit, that was 3,000 years ago, sorry. And it's like, holy crap, that's crazy. Both really cool episodes. Esoterica is the name of the YouTube channel. Dr. Justin Sledge is the guy. Esoterica is spelled ESOTERICA. I think it's called also, if you're from the YouTube side of things, because sometimes like in the URL it's slightly different, in case you're just making sure that you got the right one. I think it's the at the Esoterica channel, but Esoterica works fine in all caps in the or not in all caps. Honestly, just extremely knowledgeable about ancient history and stuff and theology. And specifically, their work appears to be very much around, more to do with like is more like philosophically, more about philosophy and theology stuff. That has been really cool. And for anyone wondering if if any of this is like confrontational to like your own personal beliefs, because I've already talked about some things that some people don't like talking about from a religious standpoint. He is actually Jewish, and he is of a particular movement. He's part of the Reconstructionist movement of Judaism, which I've been reading about before the podcast started. And it's quite interesting to see what that's about. But yeah, and he has opinions sort of based upon like the knowledge that should exist around this, and so on. So this isn't like a specifically, I tried to say this, and I think the Within Reason podcast does this, and I think me and Alex have talked about this, that we are not like anti-religious, like some individuals on the internet are. And I think this is actually a really interesting like cross connection, where I think there really isn't a reason not to be interested in this history, even if you believe that, like divinely we didn't like kind of have the correct interpretation until a certain point in history. Like, that's perfectly fine. If that's what you want to believe, then that's what you believe. And yeah, so it's brilliant. Anyway, I really recommend it. I'd actually recommend it to you, Alex, as well, because there's some of these videos are long, and they give me you know how you say that you like to, I don't know, obviously if everything is a subject that you want to be interested in, you would be that interested in, but I know that sometimes you have like these, like you really like watching these like essays, like YouTube essays that are long and just get to listen to them in the background or whatever it is. And I could definitely recommend these because, geez, I'm sure you could find something amongst this that's fascinating. That would work for it. And the style is very like kind of, yeah, he's going to talk about this and and there isn't a lot of like kind of, there isn't a lot of YouTube bullshit, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's like it's exactly what you kind of want to hear. You get what you're offered, and lots of stuff about like kind of lots of different things. Anyway, I won't go into it too much because now I'm just talking about it for the sake of talking about it while I'm looking at all of the things that are available. But there is lots of cool stuff, and again, I would highly recommend the specific episodes I mentioned, episode 65 and 83, because he's in those, and I want to see I know Alex O'Connor really liked having him, which is why he's on there twice. And I think similarly, I share that kind of interest and love for his work. So, I just want to shout that out.
Well, we're going to take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. I'm about to split this into 2 different episodes. Jesus Christ. We're in the wind. See ya.
Just cut out everything that I said in the video. You'll shorten the length down properly.
Join the AI protest and just post a silent episode for 2.5 hours.
Oh yeah, okay.